Hello, friends.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
joining
joining the
us.
live stream. I'm Joshua Koyapalai,
I'm Josiah Quaipalai.
and we're working on a comic book called Caden and the Yak Thieves. And it's about the Mongol Empire and some yak herders who are taking care of a herd and their struggle with some rustlers who are stealing their yaks. And so today I'm going to be working on the shading on this page, and it's kind of putting the finishing touches on the page, and I'm going to be showing some of the last things that I do to finish the page with like the filters that I put on it to kind of unify the colors, and also adding shadows to the page. So first of all, thank you all for joining, and if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments, or put them in the comments, and Josiah will read them and we'll answer them. If you have any questions about the process or about like the history stuff that Josiah talks about, and if you'd like to see an excerpt of this comic, you can. There's a link in the description box below where you can see the first 11 pages of the comic. And also, if you'd like to stay updated on our project, then sign up for our newsletter, and that's the link to that is in the description box below too. So let's get into this page. So here's this page that we're working on right now, and I think we're going to start off by reading it.
Yeah.
So we start. So Caden says, "Oh, and can everyone hear? Okay, is the sound working good? Let us know if there's any problems."
Yeah. I'll be reading them. If someone says that.
Okay.
I'll check if the.
So
sound's coming
Caden
in
says, So what's happening here is they're looking for the yak thieves, and they met some merchants, and the merchants are trying to get Batar and Ublek to join them and work for them, and Batar wants to join because he likes to travel the world.
Samuel Svensson says hi everyone, so I think you can hear us.
Oh,
hi
Samuel. Thanks for joining the live stream. And also,
Sounds perfect.
Ublek wants to, and Ublek wants to join because he likes food, and they have spices and stuff that he likes. So I'll read this. He says, "Guys, come on." Oh yeah, and Caden doesn't want them to go with him.
Yeah.
And the merchant says, Yes. I believe this will be beneficial for us all. And I've got a feeling in my... No, don't say it." And whenever... There's been a trope in the comic that whenever someone says bones, Tashi, don't say it. Bones. Woof. Ah. And then everything collapses.
Yeah.
As Tashi jumps all over them. So I'm going to start working on adding the shadows to this page.
Okay.
And
So that's what you're doing today, shadowing?
Yeah.
Shading, what do you call that?
so the steps were the sketch and then the ink. So I'll show you these different layers.
Oh, that's going to be neat to see. You're going to take the layers apart, basically.
So
Oh, wow.
let me find this sketch.
Why is the
There it
sketch
is.
broken up like that? That's what you do? You kind of break it apart?
It was kind of I had to redo parts of it,
Oh, okay.
but yeah. So basically, these are all turned down. But so this is like the sketch. The bottom sketch layer that I did
Okay.
first.
This is like you
This
get
is
the
where,
pencil drawing and then you draw over
Mhm.
that once?
So yeah, and then I
Okay.
turned all these down
Uh-huh.
and inked over them.
You turn them blue, you mean, right? You turn them to like a blue color.
Yeah,
And then
I
ink
turned
over
down the
them.
opacity and inked over them.
Yeah.
And this is the ink layer. and then under that I did the flat colors. Okay, and then for the background, there were some. I made the background kind of a gradient to dark, and then I added some different, just the shadows in the back.
Yeah.
As it gets deeper into the forest, it gets darker.
That's what the gradient is. The gradient is like going from one color
to another color.
And it gradually goes over to another color.
So that's what I did so far,
Okay.
and then the over the flat colors goes another layer that I put the shadows on, and I'm gonna have them a little higher than I'm actually gonna have them on the finished one, just so I can see easier. So
in other words, they're going to be
so
like darker. The
yeah,
contrast is going to be higher, is what you're saying, right?
So like this is what it will look. This is what it looks like when I'm putting these shadows on. But in the final thing, it's going to be at about 50%. So lower, like that. But
48%.
I'll probably have it higher while I'm working on it. Just
Okay,
so
you
it's
can
easier
see
to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So
and you kind of like, you have shadowing has is a technique, right? It's kind of a
it's pretty fun once you understand how to do it.
yeah. I know.
But the way it took a while for me to understand how to think about it.
Yeah.
Because
right.
At first, how I thought about it was, so there's shadows and there's highlights, and those are the two layers that you put over it.
Right.
And it really, it's one of my favorite things because you see the character or whatever you're drawing as an actual object. After that, you can it looks more realistic. It looks more like it's actually there.
Yeah.
So, but the way I thought about it when I was first trying to learn how to do it was I would just think, so the shadow is on one side, the highlight is on the other side, and I would just kind of go like this. I'd put the shadows on one side like this, one side of the face.
Okay.
And
looks pretty good.
And and then I would go do the highlight, and I would just do it on the opposite side of everything, and it looks
cylindrical, like he's like a chess piece or something, right?
So
it looks like he's just a round object.
As a more simple example, I could just make a circle and shade a ball. Okay?
Yeah.
So I'll go over here and I'll turn the speech bubbles off so I can have some space to draw. So if we have a ball like this, and we do shadows on one side of it, okay, and we do the highlight on one side, it doesn't show that this is a round thing. It just looks like there's an edge and then a flat surface on top.
Oh, okay.
So the other way to do it would be go and the highlight will just touch the tip of it. It'll just the part that's closest to the light is where the highlight will be, and it would just be like that, somewhere on part of the edge that's closest to the light, and then the shadow would be on the other side, the opposite side, where the light can't get to.
Yeah.
So that shows more of the round shape to it, you know.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so when you think about that, then it helps you. So then how to apply that to the rest of the comic,
to more complex shapes like a nose, and a cheekbone.
Yeah, you have to think,
because everything is really made of simple shapes like that, right? You just kind of
that's how you do it. Is you think about each shape you're working with and what it is, So over here, well, of course, right here you have the ball, and so for the shadow here, you would have it coming like around it, a ball like that. And for his hat, it would be, it's more than just on one side of it, like more of it is below the light. More of it is not reaching. The light isn't reaching.
Okay.
So there would be more of it under his cheekbone. Could have more shadow.
Yeah.
Where the light isn't reaching, under his nose, and
under the lines in his eyes.
Yeah.
Right, a little bit
here.
Or do those go in or out? That's the thing. What is that?
No, it goes out.
Okay.
So, and then all his neck would probably, there would be no light reaching that. So this is a pretty, at first it might take a while to figure it all out, but then once you know it, it's easy to just apply it to all the different shapes. So, and then I mostly do shadows, and I don't use highlights everywhere. But like on this place right here, we have Tashi next to the fire, and he'd be having a lot of highlights right around his in the front of his face and his hair there. And like
you were saying the thing that's closest to the light source, you illuminate it.
Yeah.
So if something's really close to the light source,
here's where I did shadows on this.
There's
on
an
this
example
scene.
of it.
So where I put shadows was where the places where the light isn't reaching. So the fire doesn't reach like the back of his head, and it's blocked out by his cheek. The top of his cheek has shadows on it, and behind his nose, and there, and then on the rocks, like the opposite side of the rocks away from the fire, has shadows.
Oh yeah.
And it just makes a really neat look when you can add shadows to it.
So right now it looks a lot more. This looks
a lot
more flat now. But when you without that's what we call it, the flat colors, right? Because it doesn't have any depth right now, right?
No.
This brings out the depth and stuff. Makes it look like a physical object.
So after I'm done with some shadows, I'll turn it off and on, and you can see like the difference.
Oh yeah, okay. That's probably the hard part, right, Tashi? Because he has so many hairs.
He'll just have some shading and on some of the fur, the hair. So this is, if you'd like to see more of this comic and to see the other times Tashi jumped and gets excited when people say bones, there's you can see the excerpt to understand. So
11 pages of the comic, the first 11 pages, for free.
And lots more on the Patreon if you'd like to follow along there. So, and you're going to talk about the Mongol.
Yeah, I was going to continue our discussion on the history of the Mongol Empire
and like the nomadic
and other nomadic empires. Yeah.
So these people are nomads, right?
Yes.
They live in yurts.
Yeah, like we talked about.
They raise yaks.
A long time ago, feels like now.
But also, they live in a community.
Yes.
So did nomadic people live in a community like that?
They did. So they had clans, which were not family clans necessarily. They were just groups of people that were living in a district. They were living together. They had a similar hierarchical structure like in medieval Europe, where they had lords and serfs. Only they didn't really. It wasn't about the land.
It wasn't really like a
so
kingdom,
much.
though. But I mean, kingdoms had like the castle. Did Mongols have a castle?
They didn't really do that because to them land was owned by everyone, and they just moved around this land, and based on basically what where there's more grass. They would move in a cyclical kind of way. Like they'd move north in the summer, where there's grass, abundant grass, and then they move south in the winter, when there's more grass there. And they were connected in a way though, because they had the way they moved was governed by the higher, their superiors, the lords. That's how they were granted, like they controlled like how when the people moved and where they moved to. That's basically how the feudal system worked for the nomadic people. And it's not just the Mongols. There was the rise of the Mongol Empire is not only, or the rise is not unique in history essentially, right? Because there's other nomadic empires that rose up and conquered large amounts of the world.
I think what are the famous ones?
The Mongols, of course. The Mongols are famous because they're the biggest. But there's the Huns, the Xiongnu. There's the Scythians.
Like a Chinese.
I think it's the name Xiongnu comes to us from Chinese history. We don't know how they would pronounce it. They weren't Chinese. They spoke a Turkic language, which didn't sound like Chinese.
So,
a lot of it we know from history. A lot of this stuff we know from history, not from the history of the people around them. See, because there's this vast Central Asian steppe, or the Eurasian steppe they call it. It goes all the way from Mongolia to Germany, right? It's just continuous grassland. And dotted inside this vast steppe are cities, of like non-nomadic people. And we get a lot of this information from them because they wrote history. A lot of these nomadic people didn't write, actually. So what were you saying?
I want to say right here, I have some kind of dramatic shadows because this fire is right here.
Yeah.
And the parts that are facing away from the light will have shadows. So
yeah, you don't usually get a lot of underlighting, right? Like
no. Yeah, so
that makes sense. So does it change as it goes away? I mean, like as you go further away from the fire, or how do you do that?
Then I'll just do shadows that are mostly under things, so that the shadows will be like underneath their nose or underneath their. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So, these sedentary people would one way, of course, there's no Mongol Empire today, right? All these nomadic civilizations eventually fell, and in different ways, in different cases, and sometimes it's a combination of various different things coming into play, but in a lot of the cases, it was these sedentary people getting smart with them and figuring out ways to keep them from invading them, essentially, preventing these large empires from forming and destroying them.
So who would destroy them? Other nations, or their own? I mean,
there's different ways it happened. One way is that they would prevent it early, basically take preventative measures against these kind of nomadic empires rising up. The Chinese diplomats would essentially divide and conquer. They would take sides and favor one. They would get them to fight amongst each other. They'd pit them against each other. They would bribe them with gifts. Just don't invade us. Invade these people.
But what does that have to do with the downfall? Well,
that would stop a large empire. They'd divide. There'd be a large empire that was rising up, and they would,
So that would stop.
That would stop them.
They
would get them.
Make a downfall of a large empire.
Yeah, they'd get them. They'd get because what would usually happen with these nomadic empires would be a uniting of all the tribes, of all these disparate nomadic tribes, and when the Byzantine or the Chinese diplomats saw that happening, they would get in there quickly and try to cut it. Get them divided. They would, like, bribe them in some cases, hire them out as mercenaries, get them fighting against each other, like support one and get the other ones jealous of them. And
so there were nomadic people. They lived in tents, and they just were by themselves, right? They were just. But how did they?
It was a vast plain, so they were pretty isolated from each other at times.
Yeah. So how did they stay unified as Mongols.
Uh-huh. In the case of the
Did
Mongols,
they consider themselves part of a huge nation?
Yeah.
Empire?
That's a good question. So the way that the Mongols did that, the way that Genghis Khan did that, is by declaring himself the leader of all people who live in yurts, basically. Doesn't matter what race they were, whether they're Mongols, Turkic people, Tungusic people, or just Indo-Aryan people. He just said, I am the leader of all people who live in yurts.
Wow.
All people live in felt tents.
And they recognize that?
And as he got more and more powerful, and this juggernaut grew, and people thought, this is the way to go. We got to stick with this thing.
Yeah.
He made everyone Mongols, and whether they weren't Mongols or were Mongols, he said, "You are now Mongols. You will live like Mongols."
And they submitted to that.
Yes, they did. They saw like
he had an army, right?
He had an army. He was charismatic. He got people together. He united people. The way that the thing that attracted people to him was that he wasn't interested in their lineage, right? And the fact that he didn't prefer Mongols over other races. He preferred merit. He was meritocratic. So people saw that and they realized they can be part of this, and so they joined on pretty quickly. In fact, the Kyrgyz people, which is a Turkic race, not a Mongolic race, in 1 year they joined. They just joined into the Mongol horde, basically, the Mongol Empire. And what he would do is then he'd say, "Now you must live like Mongols." They would shave their hair in the Mongol style, like Ublek has. Whether they're Mongolic or Turkic, and they would basically forsake their lineage and just embrace this new identity.
And how did it work with other people who weren't other nations
who weren't even nomads,
who weren't part of the Mongol Empire?
Well, I don't think they would cut their hair like the Mongols or anything like that, but they did join on. There are Persians and Chinese, because Genghis Khan knew that he needed these people. They knew how to do things that the nomads didn't know how to do. I see. They knew how to build siege artillery and catapults and battering rams and stuff. And they didn't know how to do that kind of stuff. They knew diplomacy and political arts, and they knew how to make pottery and like that.
So did merchants have a pretty big part?
Yes, as it was very much a merchant empire. It survived on merchanting, on trading and uniting, the Europe to Asia and getting trade between them. It brought a whole new a whole new level of crafts and art, because you had like Chinese tailors getting material from Persia, or maybe the other way around, like the Persians who make they would weave silk and stuff and make, they use Chinese materials to make their own craft, so you had a powerhouse of like things coming together, and it led to like the invention of China, that's in the porcelain, right? Or the distribution of it, I guess.
So there's a few things I have to do to finish up this page. One of them is the fire needs like a glow that I'm going to add to it, and the stuff in the background, the lines that are inked, these black lines here, I'm going to change the color to make it more of a lighter color so that they go back farther into the background.
So you just make it gray, or do you make it more like a color that's more like...
I'll pick like a bluish color or a purple
color. That's
color.
Similar to the stuff around it.
And so I'll show you these things. In a second, once I'm done shading these next 2 trees, I'll show you turning the shadows off and on to see the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is usually how I was talking before about how the Byzantines and the Chinese, being surrounded by this vast Eurasian steppe, they had to deal with several nomadic tribes wanting to attack them. usually they just spade them off with gifts. They just say, hey, you can have this land, just stay away, and we'll give you more. We'll give you what you want. The things they want, like alcohol, because they don't make alcohol, and just like grain and stuff that they grow, right? Because you can't grow grain out if you're a nomad. The only kind of grain they would grow is something they'd plant at the end of the like in fall they plant it, or like in the spring they plant it and then come back in the summer and harvest it. Maybe that's the only kind of agriculture they ever did. They didn't do a lot of agriculture, but the sedentary people did, and they wanted that stuff. But if worse came to worse and they had to fight, you do see the Chinese adapting, for instance, to the style of combat that's needed to fight the nomads. They had to fight them in the same way they had to fight them with cavalry. The only way you can fight cavalry, it seems, is to adapt the same style. They'd have to adapt the cavalry art, like the same style as these Mongols would fight in. They did this with the Xiongnu. They used before that period, they would fight on chariots. They would have.
So did the Mongols have chariots?
No,
okay.
They didn't use chariots. The Chinese used the chariots.
I see.
I
didn't know that.
Yeah, because what they would have is they'd have a chariot and a chariot driver, and then the warrior would be in the back of the chariot with a spear or arrows or something, and they didn't like riding on horseback. They weren't, into that. In fact, the Silk Route, part of it was they trade silk to Europe, and the Europeans would be trading back in exchange for that horses. So like if you're in China, you'd probably think of it as the horse route, the way that you get horses. The Europeans think of it as the way they get silk, but the Silk Route is actually how they got their horses, because they wouldn't use the Mongol horses, right? They would use the bigger type of horse, like a European kind of horse.
Yeah, Mongol horses are pretty small.
Yeah,
they have a specific type of horse,
and they need a lot of pasture land. The horses that the Chinese wanted, they would be the kind that they could raise on like grain and fodder and stuff, So they moved toward that style of horseback warfare, and they actually, there was this kind of a stigma in China of riding on horseback, and it was looked at as kind of low class, because they didn't want to. You'd have to wear trousers. You'd wear pants. That wasn't popular in China. They always want to wear long robes. That's what was popular. And they wanted to ride in a chariot like their ancestors did. That was the royal. That was like the symbol of power. But they did eventually evolve into a more cavalry-based. Not completely cavalry-based, of course. But
so this panel is pretty much done. And well, one thing that you might be thinking is strange is that the picture doesn't go all the way out to the edge.
Yeah.
But that's because the program has an outside edge layer that, so when you go to actually print the book, you need some space to send to the printers that might get cut off. So the picture you actually want in the book, you need to have a little bit more drawing than that, so that any edges don't get cut off. So this whole edge right here, this whole layer, this whole place.
Oh, where that line is? You can show that. Yeah.
There's a line here that the drawing needs to extend out past the edge, so that there's extra space where stuff might get cut off. So now I'll show this panel without the shadows.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
So this is with the shadows, and then this is without the shadows.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. So it looks flat. It looks like they're just pieces of paper taped onto a real background without the shadows.
So, wait, just a second. I messed something up here. I'll put this back. Okay. So yeah, you can see the different, what it looks like with and without the shadows.
Wow.
Yeah, I like seeing the difference.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so now we'll move on to the next part.
You were telling me before we started about this. This panel here all kind of happens in like 1 second, right?
Yeah, yeah, this is interesting. How the pacing works.
Mm-hmm.
So it's similar to this page where Caden is coming up to see Oobleck for the first time, and we start off this page by just seeing these sausages.
This is an establishing shot, right? Essentially, in the photography, in the movie business, what they would call a.
Yeah, it's important how you switch from scene to scene.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too abrupt. This kind of eases in to this new scene.
This isn't This isn't like action to action.
Yeah.
Or moment to moment. It's more of a idea to, what is it called? What is it called? Like idea to idea,
it's
concept.
Yeah, it's where you take a look at different subjects in one scene.
Right.
So we're looking at
sausages are cooking.
The sausages grilling, and then Tashi chewing on his bone, and then we see Oobleck here from this down shot up looking at him, and then we see all of them together.
Yeah. Okay.
As Caden comes up.
So you're saying that's like
that's kind of what's happening here.
Yeah.
And what that does is, if it was just this shot, if it was just this panel right here, it wouldn't have the same kind of contemplative feeling of kind of
putting all the pieces together. Like like, there's this happening.
You're processing each thing one by one. We're kind of guiding the reader's eye and mind through what's happening, and it gives more emphasis to what's happening. So over here, this is this really intense moment where time kind of goes into slow motion because they know something's about to happen. It's kind of this really they're like, they know what's about to happen, so they kind of freeze up, and we're trying to play this out slowly so that people can think about what's going to happen.
Right.
So this one split second where he says, "I have a feeling in my bones," goes into it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels.
Right.
And then Tashi jumps. So that's where we're really focusing on this moment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting thing that, it's not just, it could happen in one panel, but then it wouldn't have the same effect when Tashi jumps.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. Now I'll start shading this next panel.
So, I was talking about the Chinese, adapting to the military style that works best against the nomadic people. Well, you see a similar thing with the Roman and Eastern Roman, the Byzantines, which is the Eastern Roman Empire. They're also surrounded by many nomadic tribes that would want to destroy them and loot their land.
The Byzantines, were they had contact with
they had contact with China even.
Wow.
Then they came into contact with.
Because they're more like, what is their?
They would be in
European,
they'd be in Europe. They're in what is modern day Turkey.
So they would have armor and stuff, right?
Yes, they would definitely have. They'd have a lot of steel armor, chainmail. They'd have every advantage that the Romans had. They essentially, at the outset, they had a Roman army, like a Roman style army with, regiments, and they'd be having the large shields and swords and spears, and that didn't work very well against the nomads who would just ride up and pick shots at them with bows and arrows, right? So they had to also adapt that style, and they came up with they started recruiting cavalry, and they formed a sort of a cavalry regiment, several cavalry regiments that are called the cataphract cavalry, that would wear like armor, and they pretty much were like the first heavy cavalry of the Roman Empire. Before, they had light cavalry, which were not very heavily armored, and they were more for speed. These were heavier cavalry, sort of almost like knights, like the ancestors. Some people consider them the like the predecessors of the knight.
So if you're just joining the live stream, we're working on. I'm adding shadows to this page, and it's our comic that we're working on called Caden and the Yak Thieves. And if you'd like to check out a comic excerpt of the comic and see the first 11 pages of the story, then you can find the link to that in the description box below. And also, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and we'll try to answer them.
Yeah.
And we're talking about how some of the nomadic empires fell.
Right. The other way they would fall is
so the first thing was they're from the inside, right?
No, not from the inside. Like from
from other
from the sedentary people who are very weary of getting raided by them.
Okay.
Would step in and with clever diplomacy get in there, and
that's what Genghis Khan would do. He would find nomadic people, people who are living nomadically, and then try to make them part of his empire.
The smart move of if there was some smart diplomats around at that time, they would have gone in there and like tried to stop that deal from happening, stop that merger, that uniting of these empires from happening. But there wasn't at that point.
Yeah,
I don't know what it was. The Chinese leaders didn't really get around to it. They're too lazy, I guess. But
so, and then the next thing you were talking about was what?
Is like basically other nomadic tribes leading to the downfall of a nomadic empire. We see this with over and over again in history, because on the Eurasian steppe, the further west you go, the more fertile the land is, the easier you can raise horses and herds and stuff. So what will happen is a nomadic tribe will go out and take this land, and then the ones in the east will be like, they want that land, and they'll invade them, and this is a cycle that just keeps happening over and over again, essentially.
Wow.
And a good example of that is if you think about it, Hungary, the European country, it came from some people called the Magyars who were actually Turkic nomads. They went west and found this fertile land, and throughout history you see the Mongols coming in and then invading them. So that's essentially an example of that, right? Like they settled down. The Magyars.
Do they still exist, or is that an ancient?
They're the descendants of the Hungarian people. The Hungarians, they live essentially like European. They lived essentially like European people, but they preserved their language. The Hungarian language is a Turkic language, not or it's actually a Uralic language. So it's not like most European languages are Indo-European languages. Like English and German and French, but Hungarian is not related to that. It's a different language.
Okay.
Root. So that's usually how a lot of the nomadic empires fell, was by wars between them. That's probably the majority, to be honest. Most of them were conquered by greater nomadic empires that united together and then took their land. The other way, and this is the case with the Mongol Empire, is by failing to unite around the same leader. So after Genghis Khan dies, they had a pretty good run of Khans who were, because how it worked in the Mongol Empire was they would elect a Khan. Actually, they were into that meritocratic kind of system, right?
But I thought that it was Genghis Khan and then his son and his children.
It was. It just so happened to be like that.
Okay.
I mean, that's how a lot of monarchs worked. Technically, they would actually elect someone, but in most cases it was the descendants of the ruler before, because he would be popular,
Yeah.
right? He would be, because to be a good leader, it's not just about how good you can lead. You have to also be popular among the people. You have
Name
to have
recognition.
you have to have some charisma, and you have to also have popularity.
Yeah.
So it would be it worked well to have the descendants of the Khan be the, be the leaders. But when it got to, after a few Khans, after 3 subsequent Khans, it went to his son, went to Genghis Khan's son, and then his other son. But then they failed to agree on his grandson. For whatever reason, they just didn't. Some of the leaders didn't even show up for the election. What happened? There's what they.
So they didn't elect him. So the leaders elect him, like the
leaders,
like the leaders of a community would elect.
Yeah, the leaders of each part of the empire would elect him.
I
The
see.
generals, the khans. So
The Khans.
Khan is just a name for a ruler, actually.
Oh.
Then there's a great Khan,
Okay.
who's the superior Khan of all the Khans.
Huh.
The Kagan is the word they use for that.
I see.
And they have this election called a Kurultai,
Mhm.
where they come in from all, the leaders come from all the different regions and elect a leader. But the leader of one of the regions,
Mhm.
one of them, it was one of Genghis Khan's sons, named Batu. He just didn't come. He just said, "No, I'm not going to elect a leader. I don't care. I'm going to just proclaim myself leader." Basically, is what he did.
Wow.
He just defied it. And then, after that act, it slowly started to cascade, and the Mongol Empire was then divided into 4 regions. It started with Batu's region, which was the Golden Horde, called the Golden Horde, and that is modern-day Russia. And then the Chagatai Khanate, which is Central Asia nowadays, in modern times. And then the Ilkhanate split off, which is I'm not telling this in the right order necessarily, but the Ilkhanate declared its independence. That's like the Middle East. That's the Khanate. That's the Middle East nowadays. And the Yuan dynasty, which is Mongolia, like where modern day Mongolia is, and then also China.
Okay.
So it's split into those 4 different empires, basically. And that caused. So they became autonomous from each other, right? They became independent. Like, hypothetically, they should all be ruled by the Yuan dynasty, who was the person who would be the leader of the Yuan dynasty, because that would be Mongolia, right? That's the seat of power. But the leader of the Mongolian Empire at that point was Kublai Khan, and for whatever reason, I mean, I have to research more about it. I don't really know much about exactly why this happened, but they didn't really acknowledge him as leader, and actually one reason is because they didn't like him. He was too Chinese. He grew up Chinese, basically.
Was he related to Genghis Khan?
Yes, he's the grandson of Genghis Khan.
I see.
Kublai Khan is the grandson of Genghis Khan. You probably heard of both of those leaders, right?
Yeah.
Before. That's how they're related,
I see.
And that's actually goes into the next thing that I'm gonna talk about. The other way that the empires would have fallen is by assimilation. Because you see, these nomadic people, they didn't have a very complex like standard of living, a very high standard of living.
So they didn't have something that really united them, or?
I mean, the thing that united them is the thing that destroyed them. Actually, the thing that they united under is we want the riches of all these nations, right? But by taking on the riches of these nations and becoming like those people, they were destroyed, because they just became like the people they set out to destroy.
So they lost their identity.
Yeah, and they lost the thing that made them powerful, which was their nomadic,
lifestyle,
hardy ability to ride around, conquer the world, and they just became soft like the people that they attacked.
They became decadent, right?
Yes, they became decadent. That's exactly what it is. So they wanted a higher standard of living, right? That's the whole reason. In fact, Genghis Khan is quoted to have said, I want to leave a legacy. My grandchildren will have the things that they may not remember me, but they'll have all the great things that I didn't have. That's kind of what he said, right? They started to take on the religions of the people around them, because their religions before that were, they kind of worship rivers and trees and stones. They're animists, or they worship the sky. So when they're confronted with these more complex religions, they realize, like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, they actually started to follow them. In fact, in the capital of the Mongol Empire, not the capital of Mongolia, but the capital of the Mongol Empire, Karakorum, there was actually churches and mosques and Buddhist temples, because Genghis Khan didn't mind what religion people practiced. He didn't mind. He was into freedom of religion just so long as everyone followed him as their human leader. He didn't care what kind of religion you believed in. So there was Buddhist temples in the capital. There was everything. There was every kind of, there was even, I think, maybe even synagogues in the capital. And they also started to take on the cultures of the people around them. They started to be dressed like Chinese or Persian or Russian, because that's kind of what they wanted, right? They just wanted the riches of those people. I was talking about Hungary, right? They were some nomadic people. They were the Magyars. They came into Hungary, and they took on the kind of European lifestyle. That's a perfect example of it, right? Also, the leaders of the Mongol Empire and these nomadic empires started to marry into the families of the local people. And in the subsequent generations, they started to value their heritage, the heritage of their local heritage, right? The heritage of, say,
the families
Persians.
they married into.
Yeah, the heritage of the families that they married into. And they started to tote that, to as a status symbol. Instead of I'm a relative of Genghis Khan, they would say I'm a relative of this Persian emir, or this Persian, vizier. I'm a relative of, and they would gain favor of the local people that way. So they would just put aside their Mongol heritage.
Wow.
And that's exactly what I was talking about with Kublai Khan, right? People were saying you're becoming too Chinese. You're living like a Chinese person. You eat Chinese food. You live in a Chinese city.
Yeah.
And you're becoming a soft, sedentary person. In fact, they don't pay much attention to Kublai Khan in Mongolian history. They don't look at him as a popular leader. They don't
because he didn't really carry on their culture.
Yeah, because they value the person who brought prosperity to the Mongolian motherland, the heartland, not the person who went off and became a Chinese leader.
Yeah.
And got in, engulfed into Chinese politics.
Yeah.
The same thing happened in Russia. They went there, they came there, and they married into Russian families, and they just became Russian. There's probably some Russian in Russian people's DNA. If you go there, you probably find some Mongolian DNA.
So and another thing about this, about the shadows, is if you think about it as a shape instead of that original thing that I talked about, there might be more shadows that you do, and instead of just this one edge of it, instead of just doing one edge, you do the whole area that would be away from the light. So instead of having like on Batar's hat here, we have, it's not just right here. There's more, because there's stuff that goes a little bit under the hat that's sticking out more, and it helps to think about, push yourself to think about, wait, where would there be more shadows? Maybe there's a bigger patch of shadow here. So yeah, that's one thing that you can tell the difference of just thinking about it as a flat thing or actually as a shape.
Yeah.
So this whole underside of Tashi as he jumps, his whole belly is covered in shadow because.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I see.
And then now this is done with this panel here, and I'm going over to the final panel. This is probably gonna be the most fun one to work on. So yeah, just everything here. We have Batar's face will be mostly shadowed because he's looking down.
Oh, okay.
And there's no light down there. So we might have a little bit of his cheek. Just a little bit smaller.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of his cheek might be lit up.
And this is of course going to be, the contrast isn't going to be so harsh.
No.
Because right now it looks like it's like a studio light or something.
Yeah. So then
Or a spotlight or something.
His deal here have shadows there. And yeah, this was a fun page to. This was a fun, especially fun panel.
Samuel wants you to turn the shading off to contrast in this picture.
Okay.
So we have to do that right now.
I'll do that with these ones.
See what this
here.
looks like.
Let me go over to this.
That'd be pretty dope.
This one.
Oh wow.
So that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes things look like what they're supposed to be, right? Like,
yeah, it looks like it's actually,
because that's a wagon. You know,
it looks like it's actually standing there.
Yeah.
You know?
I think something's wrong. Looks wrong about his face. The Chinese merchant guy, the guy in the red robe. But I don't know.
Oh, the way that it's.
The shadows over
yeah.
here. Something looks funny about it.
Yeah, I think his whole face looks like it should be shaded like that because.
Yeah.
Okay.
That looks good.
So yeah, it's a big difference.
Oh yeah.
And let's see the other one.
I like
here.
that picture of Batar. Everything's integrated well. You know, his bow case. You figure out how to integrate it. You know.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun action scene to draw. I thought it was gonna be. I mean, I thought it was just gonna be a lot of work, but it was actually.
Don't you think
fun.
the ribbon? I mean, there's a couple of pictures where the ribbon should be in his in his hat. Like
yeah,
maybe even in that one.
Yeah, let's see.
And in the one before.
Yeah, I could have the ribbon there. It might be like flying.
Yeah, this is based on like a Mongolian type of hat. It's a bit like that Russian fur hat you might see the Russians wear sometimes, even today.
So
like the cylindrical kind of, just
might
like
have one of the ribbons.
fur hat.
That maybe.
Yeah. Only this one. It's kind of fancy, right? Where it's almost like it's a long strip of fur that's tied together with a ribbon. I think that's what it is.
I did the ribbon everywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
gotta color it now.
So should I go back to what I was talking about? What was I talking?
Just I have a couple things to say here. So after I finish this.
So Samuel Svensson says, "Wow, it looks so different when you turn the shading off."
Yeah, I like to see that.
Mm-hmm. I remember when you didn't even use shading, right? Right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I
just flat colors.
Most of the time I did.
Okay. I mean, when
you were
like,
there was a comic I made. It was like a Thanksgiving comic. And
I thought it does really make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, look at that.
But the biggest difference is actually when you understand how to use it. That's the big difference is where you can make it look like it's actually a shape. So
yeah, and you would probably say like to learn that you should do that kind of drawing exercise of shading different shapes, right? Different simple geometric shapes.
And just keep working 3D. With it. It'll be slow at first, but then as you do it, you'll get more used to it. Okay. So yeah, this page.
So we have like 6 minutes.
There were fun things with like, of course, Tashi standing up here on top of the guy and the carriage, the
overturned carriage.
Yeah, and then the people's positions. Like this one, I had to use like a reference photo to see the way of a Batar sitting here and leaning down.
Samuel says,
So-
you showed the Thanksgiving comic to me. I guess he's seen the Thanksgiving
Okay,
comic.
yeah.
I didn't know that.
So
Where'd you,
let
you
me-
posted that somewhere or something? Or
I sent it to Samuel.
oh, okay, just did it different.
I need to.
Someday you can post these, the archive basically of the old comics.
Yeah. So I'll just. Yeah, I wanted to finish this up, but I think I'll have to go over to showing like the line. The finishing touches that I add
Okay.
onto it. So
Oh, you're gonna do some of that. Yeah. So it looks like we have about
4 minutes left.
4 minutes left. Yeah.
Okay, so what I do here is I create a layer that goes right over the ink layer, and there's this button. There's a button that looks like, I'll just draw it really quick because I can't zoom into it, but it looks like it shows oops, it looks like this, and
Okay.
there's this little,
Does it not show it on the screen?
it's over here, I can't really zoom into it,
Oh, okay.
but it's called the clip to layer below. Okay.
Wow.
And I use that button, and what it does is it just draws over the layer below.
Okay, so you put.
So-
Oh, okay, that's what you mean by when you're gonna put the ink layer below. You make a
I
layer
put
and put
it-
the ink layer below it.
Yeah. So I'll
Right.
show you what it does. So when I don't have that on, I could go like this, but when I turn that on, it puts it right on the ink lines.
Okay.
So how I use that is, I'll take a dark color, maybe a purple, bluish color, and this is another thing that I like to see.
That's really interesting because not all, a lot of ink drawn like Tintin or Asterix, they can't do that,
No,
right? You can't.
but yeah, I've seen a lot of artists do this, and it's really fun to see this when it's done, and like the difference when you turn this off and on. It's another thing that I like to see, because it really sets the stuff in the foreground
Yeah.
apart from the stuff in the background.
Because air actually does cloud things, right? Just
Yeah.
air. Even though you can see right through air, you
It might
actually
be,
can't, right?
It might be a
And
little bit of an exaggeration of it, but
No, it's real. I mean, like if you like an extreme example is that if you look at trees that are really far away on the mountains, they're blue.
But anything
If
you
you're
can
blue.
do that you have to think about how to keep the reader focused on the core.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that the
But
closer
you have
up
to
is an
keep-
exaggeration. The closer up stuff, right?
Yeah, well, you have to keep the reader focused on what's going on,
Right.
and things that if you put things in the comic that distract from what's happening, then the reader will lose focus of the story, and it'll
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
break the flow of them reading the comic. So
that's true of almost anything. Like if you just put like, I don't know, a box out there for no reason, people are gonna just focus on that. Like you gotta plan it so it's just everything that's there is there for a reason, and if it's there to pay attention to. It's not.
So I'm almost done here, and
Which is the same thing, I guess. But are you gonna shade the smoke? Is that gonna be like?
I will do that
Uh-huh.
with a different color
Yeah.
eventually. But
Okay.
and then there's just some more things here, like these little snow ridges
Mm-hmm.
and plants here that go back behind. And I might turn up the brightness a little bit just to show the
Oh, you're gonna show.
contrast.
You mean turn down the shadows contrast?
Oh, I should do that, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if this contrast should be higher. I don't know if you can do that, but maybe all of it, just because
But I might make this a little brighter. Okay, so now you can see what this does with setting the background further back.
What are you gonna be able to like contrast it?
I'll turn it off.
Oh, you can
off
turn it
and on.
off. Okay. Nice.
So here it is
Width.
with, yeah. And then let me zoom in a little bit. Here it is turned off. So
It doesn't make much of a difference, but it makes a little difference, right?
yeah, so but
Yeah, it's not as confusing. Like over here, you could start to get kind of crowded.
Yeah, with it, you just focus on the characters and everything that's in the foreground,
right?
And it really helps to push all the stuff back into the background.
Okay.
And then maybe the last thing I'll do.
It's not as big a difference as the shadows, but
yeah,
it's pretty good, pretty important, I'd say.
Yeah. So now I'll now I'll build up it all.
Yeah.
So that's the flat colors, then the shadows, and then the
okay.
yeah, the line color. And then maybe the last thing I'll do is just show the light from the fire.
Is that
I'll use a big airbrush
Oh, okay.
to add
I was thinking you were
light
gonna
here.
use some circular kind of like.
No, I'll go like this, and this is not what it's gonna look like.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna turn it down. I think I'm gonna switch it to a soft light layer. Or not, I think I keep it normal and turn it down. So it has a little bit of a
that looks good.
glow to it.
Yeah, wow.
And then
And you didn't need to do much to make it look right like that.
so with all these things it really adds a lot to the comic.
Uh-huh.
And then just some highlights right on Tashi because he's really close to
the highlights you were talking about earlier, right? Like that you don't always do.
Yeah.
This is where you would do it.
Have some highlights on the stuff closest to the fire. Like back there, he wouldn't really have highlights. It's just because it's so close to the fire.
The hair is kind of random, so you kind of reflect that with the lighting.
I don't do the whole hair. I just do little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it even more. It gives it even more personality,
And then
right?
probably Batar would have some highlights on him because on the arm and bow case and boot close to the fire. So yeah, those are the finishing touches that go onto the page.
That's quite a bit.
And there's
done, right?
there's actually some more stuff. Like there's the color layer that I put to bring the colors together, but I'll probably talk about that in a later one.
Is that kind of like it's like photography editing, right? Essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's where the colors of the page is planned, but I want to the colors that I use for drawing the characters is planned, but the scenery has its own feel to it.
Wow.
And I want to bring it all together.
You know, Pixar is really good at that. Just that out there.
Yeah, and
they make all their scenes look different colors by mood. You
yeah,
know?
we should do that. We should do one all about color.
Yeah,
and
that would be
look at the
interesting.
different because in the different scenes on this comic, I'm trying to give a real a different feel.
Yeah,
to
each different
places.
place. Yeah,
so it'd be fun to do that
at
one
different
time.
times.
So yeah, I think we did. That was lots of stuff.
Yeah, that's a lot of progress for a video, I'd say.
It's a fun thing to it's a fun stage to work on.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It goes by pretty fast.
I think it's the first time we've done shadowing on the
on
one of these live streams.
So, thank you everyone for joining.
Hope you enjoyed.
Yep. And if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, then make sure you do that. The link to that is in the description box below. And if you'd like to see more pages like this one, when I finish it and post it, you can see it on the Patreon. So, thanks for joining, and make sure to check out the comic excerpt and the newsletter if you haven't signed up to that.
Real quick, Samuel Finson says, and Pixar also has cereal. I didn't know that, but we'll definitely talk about that when we talk about the colors.
Okay.
We'll talk all about that, the different types of Pixar cereal. And
Okay.
maybe we'll get some. I don't know, because that sounds really awesome.
Well, we're sorry, but we have to go now. So
Thanks for
thank
watching.
you for joining.